Welcome to Undercover Truths, where facts come first. Hit subscribe and stay informed.
In a neighborhood where the streets are lined with quiet houses, manicured lawns, and the illusion of safety, darkness settled inside one home, a home where baby Haro, just 7 months old, should have known warmth, comfort, and protection. But the reality was far from that. This wasn't a house of family, it was a battlefield. Rooms echoed with anger, doors slammed with force, arguments lasted for hours, and whispers of secrets too heavy for anyone to carry. And in the center of it all, a child. Every scream, every crash of furniture, every angry word, he saw it. He felt it. And though he could not speak, though he could not defend himself, he absorbed it all. This story is a harsh reminder. Sometimes the most vulnerable among us are the ones the world fails to protect. Neighbors describe the Haro home as tense and unpredictable. One witness, who asked to remain anonymous, recalls nights where the shouting would start after dinner and not end until the early hours. It was constant, the neighbor said. You could hear objects hitting walls. Sometimes doors would slam so hard you could feel the vibration outside. And the baby, he cried and cried, but no one came. It is hard to imagine a child being present for such chaos. Most infants see the world as safe, as comforting. But in the Haro home, baby Haro's reality was entirely different. The father, struggling with addiction, was often absent. When he returned, he brought tension, volatility, and sometimes outright rage. These were not occasional outbursts. They were patterns, recurring nightly, gradually shaping the child's perception of the world. The mother, too, had her limitations. Friends and neighbors describe her as overwhelmed, sometimes incapable of shielding her child from the turmoil surrounding him. There were moments where she tried, but the walls of the house and the pressures within it proved too high to climb. New evidence has recently come to light. Text messages, partially deleted, hint at arguments and threats that were never reported. Witnesses recount the father's unpredictability, the mother's fear, and the neighbor's helplessness. It raises a question no one can answer without discomfort. How many chances did this family have before tragedy struck? The house itself bore the marks of conflict: broken furniture, walls scarred by impact, scattered belongings, signs of a life under constant stress. And amidst it all, the baby was always present. Every argument, every confrontation, every threat unfolded before his eyes. It is easy to look back and say something should have been done, but hindsight is a luxury a 7-month-old does not have. He relied on adults to protect him, to intervene, to recognize danger before it was too late. And yet the system, the family, the community somehow failed him. Neighbors, the only external witnesses, had their own limits. They could see the fights, hear the screams, smell the tension that seeped from the house. One neighbor remembers a night when the father came home, visibly intoxicated and enraged, shouting words no adult should ever direct at another human being, much less a child. The mother tried to calm him, pleading for quiet, but her voice was drowned out. The baby cried relentlessly, yet the cries were lost in the storm of chaos. Friends and relatives who visited the home described it as suffocating. The air was thick with tension, every room a silent witness to conflict. A child growing up surrounded by this intensity, by this violence, is forced to navigate a world of fear before they even learn to walk. And baby Haro did. Every day, every moment. The father's addiction had layers that extended far beyond substances. It was the emotional volatility, the unpredictability, the moments when anger erupted without warning. The mother's failures were no less consequential. Her inability to shield her child, whether from fear, exhaustion, or denial, contributed to an environment that was anything but safe. And still, people around them noticed the warning signs. They saw the bruises on furniture, the tension that made the air seem thick, the cries that echoed through walls. But action was minimal. Intervention was rare. As we look closer at the Haro household, a pattern emerges, a rhythm of chaos that outsiders could sense even before stepping inside. Friends and neighbors describe fleeting moments of false calm, brief pauses where the family appeared normal, but each lull was merely a precursor to the next eruption of conflict. The calm was temporary, fragile, and deceptive. The father, struggling with his addiction, carried a volatility that could ignite without warning. On some nights, neighbors recall hearing him pacing through the rooms, his footsteps sharp against the floors, followed by the sudden crash of objects thrown in frustration. The mother, though present, often appeared paralyzed by fear. She would attempt to mediate, to calm the storm, but her voice, no matter how loud, was swallowed by the intensity of the moment. And always, baby Haro was there, observing, listening, feeling the fear in the voices around him, sensing the tension that filled every corner of the home. He could not understand the complexities of anger, but he felt the danger. Every child needs safety, a place where cries can be answered and needs acknowledged. But for baby Haro, the walls themselves seemed to respond with silence. New testimonies have surfaced, recounting nights when the father's anger crossed lines that cannot be ignored. Objects thrown, doors slammed, threats spoken in moments of rage. Each incident was witnessed by the infant, each moment leaving an imprint no child should carry. One neighbor, still shaken by what they saw, explained how even standing outside, the violence could be felt. You could hear him screaming, they said. And it wasn't just a baby crying, it was terror. And it was ongoing, every night. Authorities have begun to piece together a timeline, but it raises more questions than answers. Calls made to friends, brief messages left on phones, and fragments of social media posts suggest a household on the edge for weeks, possibly months. Yet the intervention came too late, or perhaps not at all. And the chilling truth is this: the warning signs were there, visible to anyone paying attention. The mother's own struggles with fear, denial, and exhaustion created a complex picture. While she may have tried to maintain some semblance of order, her attempts were overshadowed by the environment she could not control. Every failure, every moment of hesitation contributed to a house where danger lingered and a child's innocence was constantly under threat. Neighbors speak quietly about nights they could not sleep, disturbed by what they heard. One recalls watching through a window as the father shouted, his face contorted in anger, while the mother held her arms around the baby, rocking him desperately to drown out the shouting. The sight, the sound, the fear, it left a mark not just on baby Haro, but on those who witnessed it from the outside. Recent investigative reports reveal fragments of evidence that were previously overlooked, a series of partial texts between the parents, hints at threats and arguments that were never shared with authorities, and the discovery of objects in the home suggesting confrontations far more frequent than anyone imagined. Each piece of evidence paints a picture of neglect and danger, a home where a child was never truly safe. It is impossible to ignore the role of those who could have intervened, the neighbors, the family members, the system designed to protect the most vulnerable. Each inaction, each missed opportunity leaves a haunting question: how many times could this have been prevented before the inevitable tragedy? Stay with us because, as we continue, more revelations emerge. We will explore the fractures within the family, the conflicts that escalated beyond control, and the moments that forced a tiny child to witness the very worst of human anger. Each detail will challenge your understanding of responsibility, of safety, and of how fragile a life can be in the hands of those entrusted to protect it. The story of baby Haro is not simply one of loss. It is a mirror reflecting the failures of adults, of neighbors, and of a society that allowed danger to persist within walls that should have offered sanctuary. And as the investigation unfolds, more questions surface, questions that demand answers, and a reckoning for the choices, the oversights, and the silent observations that brought us to this point. What becomes painfully clear as the investigation continues is how visible the warning signs were. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives noticed patterns of anger and neglect that escalated over time. Small incidents, an argument overheard, objects thrown, a door slammed. Each one seemed isolated in the moment, yet together they formed a narrative no one could ignore. And yet the system that exists to protect children remained distant, largely absent, or ineffective. One neighbor described the father as a man caught in a relentless battle with his own demons. His addiction had transformed ordinary disagreements into explosive confrontations. Voices that should have been gentle became sharp weapons, every shouted word a threat, every glare a warning. The mother's attempts to maintain control, to mediate, often fell short. Her exhaustion, her fear, her inability to shield her child allowed the chaos to continue unchecked. It is difficult to convey the impact this environment had on a child. Infants absorb far more than anyone might assume. They feel tension, recognize anger, and sense the fragility of the adults around them. Baby Haro was surrounded by fear on every side, yet powerless to escape it. Each night brought another episode of shouting, another argument, another moment where safety was absent. Newly uncovered evidence paints a deeper, more troubling picture. Messages recovered from phones hint at threats and arguments that were never reported. Witnesses recount nights of violence that seem almost too vivid to believe. A neighbor who had rarely spoken now comes forward, shaken, describing a night when the father returned home intoxicated, lashing out at anyone in his path. Objects were thrown, doors slammed, and amidst it all, the baby cried. The neighbor says, "I could hear him screaming, and it wasn't just a baby crying. It was fear, and it never stopped." The mother's role in this story is complex. She tried, in moments, to maintain some semblance of control, but exhaustion, fear, and possibly denial created cracks that widened over time. When adults falter, when protective instincts fail, it is the children who pay the price. And baby Haro paid it every day, every night. Even more unsettling is the realization that those outside the home, those who could have acted, saw fragments of the danger and yet hesitated. Neighbors heard the arguments, witnessed the intensity, smelled the tension, but action was minimal. Calls to authorities were delayed, warnings were dismissed, the child's cries echoed into the night, unanswered. Evidence also reveals a series of minor injuries, marks on furniture and objects in the home, suggesting confrontations that were frequent, not rare. Each mark, each bruise, each broken object tells a story of conflict in which a child was forced to participate as a helpless observer. Every argument, every scream, every thrown item became a lesson in fear, shaping an experience that no child should endure. And as the investigation unfolds, questions multiply. How many opportunities for intervention were missed? How many times could someone, family, neighbors, or authorities have stepped in to prevent what eventually happened? How many people looked the other way, convinced it was temporary, convinced it wasn't their responsibility? The answer is uncomfortable. The answer forces reflection on how society treats its most vulnerable and how easily a child's suffering can be overlooked when the chaos happens behind closed doors. Stay with us, because as we continue, we will uncover even more troubling layers, more voices, more accounts, more evidence that reveals the harsh reality of life inside that house. We will examine the father's addiction in greater detail, the mother's failures in ways that are both heartbreaking and infuriating, and the overlooked moments that could have changed everything. The deeper we examine the Haro household, the clearer it becomes that what happened was not a single moment of failure. It was a pattern of neglect, oversight, and missed opportunities. Each argument, each object thrown, each shouted threat built on the last, creating an environment of constant tension. Friends and neighbors remember noticing bruises on furniture, broken items scattered across floors, and the quiet, terrified cries of a child who had no way to protect himself. The father's addiction was an open wound within the family, one that everyone could see but few truly understood. His temper, already volatile, became explosive when fueled by substances. Nights that should have been quiet, moments that should have been tender, instead turned into scenes of fear and confrontation. Neighbors recall evenings where the sound of shouting echoed down the streets, shaking windows and leaving those nearby on edge. And through it all, baby Haro watched. He felt the danger even if he could not name it. He lived it. If you're following this investigation closely, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every new detail we uncover is crucial to understanding how this tragedy unfolded. The mother's role is equally troubling. Her fear, exhaustion, and moments of indecision left her unable to shield her child from what was happening. She remained present, but powerless, an observer herself in a home ruled by anger and neglect. Every time she hesitated, every time she failed to act, the danger in the household grew. The question that haunts investigators and neighbors alike is simple, but devastating. How could this have gone on for so long without intervention? Neighbors describe glimpses of terror that seemed to repeat night after night. One recalls a night where the father returned home, his voice booming with anger, and the mother trying desperately to calm him. Objects were hurled across the room, a chair toppled, and the baby's cries were drowned out by the chaos. From outside, it was impossible not to notice the fear and the helplessness of those trapped inside. The neighbor's voice trembles even now as they describe it. Quote, "I could hear him screaming, and it wasn't just a baby crying. It was fear, and no one came." End quote. As authorities began to investigate, a disturbing picture emerged. Text messages recovered from the parents hinted at threats, arguments, and tensions that had been going on for weeks, possibly months. Fragments of evidence suggested that both parents had been aware of the risk to their child, but failed to take decisive action. The system, designed to protect children, seemed either unaware or unable to respond effectively. The home itself tells part of the story. Rooms scarred by conflict, objects broken in moments of anger, a child's crib surrounded by the remnants of confrontation, these are the silent witnesses. They testify to an environment in which a baby's safety was compromised at every turn. Every night, every argument, every threat became part of the child's reality. Each day passed without intervention, and each day left marks invisible to the casual observer, but devastating in their impact. Stay tuned and subscribe because the next revelations are coming from neighbors who have remained silent until now. They hold pieces of the story that will shock and unsettle you. More evidence is being uncovered that reveals the father's pattern of behavior, the mother's inability to intervene, and the overlooked warnings that could have saved a child's life. Every revelation will bring us closer to understanding how tragedy was allowed to unfold in a home where a child should have been safe. The story of baby Haro forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. It asks us to consider our own role as a society in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It compels us to ask why warnings went unheeded, why cries were ignored, and how much more could have been done before it was too late. As we move forward, more voices will be heard, more details will surface, and the picture of what truly happened inside that house will become clearer. Each layer adds to the tension, each revelation raises new questions, and each moment deepens the sense of outrage. And while the story remains unfinished, the consequences of silence, neglect, and fear are painfully clear. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every detail we uncover brings us closer to understanding what happened to baby Haro and what could have been done to prevent it.